Okay, hey guys, what is up? It's the movie discussion pocket dimension where time doesn't exist and the only thing that matters is film. That's Jay. I'm Cole. We're back. Okay, so I was thinking it wasn't that long ago that we did a Kurosawa film, but it kind of was because it was last April. It was last
Mhm.
April that we did Yojimbo. So this will be our third Kurosawa film. This, of course, is Rashomon,
Oh, I forgot
1950,
we
because
did
we did
Yojimbo. Okay.
yeah, we did Yojimbo back in April, and of course back a couple years ago when we did our Masters of Film, our Akira Kurosawa episode, we chose Throne of Blood, mostly because it was maybe a little less famous than something like a Rashomon or a Seven Samurai or whatever. But we always knew we were going to get back to him, and yeah, we are going to do other Japanese directors too. I know we're going to get to some other Japanese directors, but it is kind of hard to ignore Kurosawa, who rightly or wrongly is kind of the most famous. And we've only done one Ozu so far, and I mean I could do like all his movies because I love them so much.
Mhm.
But we'll probably do another Ozu soon too. But maybe the next Japanese one we'll do will be somebody different, just to do something different. But this is Rashomon from 1950, which was um, a really important film in his career. It's the one that sort of got him noticed internationally, and
Mhm.
you can really split his career up into sort of like sections. And this is also the film that kind of got him into doing like the period pieces, a lot of these ones that focus on samurai, which he became, of course, most famous for. Because believe it or not, when this film was coming out, those types of films were considered out of fashion in Japan at the time. And I don't remember what the original studio he was with for was behind him for. Yeah, okay, I'm not wording this properly. The studio he was originally doing the movie for backed out at the last minute for this movie because they were concerned that it wouldn't do well at the box office because it was a period piece, and they had to sort of scramble to get backing from another studio to get the movie released. So this movie really kind of changed things. It sort of brought back that because obviously samurai films in particular have become very popular. Now this isn't really a samurai film. There's a samurai in it, although it's not really necessarily about that. What's interesting to me is that this film, of course, we talk about period pieces, so anything set in the past. But I mean, it's Rashomon is technically set in the Heian period, which, if you know your Japanese periods, that's going back quite a ways. Uh, the Heian era, and this is probably, and it's hard to tell because there's not much you see in the movie to really give you much clue for the historical context. But Heian era, it's probably the late Heian era, so it's probably like when you read stuff about it, it usually says it's the 10th or the 11th century. So right, so that would be on par with medieval period if you're thinking about like European time frames. So like over 800 years ago, a long, long time ago, very different world. But we don't see much, so it kind of doesn't really matter, like if it was 800 years ago or 400 years ago or 200 years ago, because a lot of the stuff we see isn't that different. Like obviously Japan changed over the centuries, but there's not much. Given this movie being very sparse, it only really has three locations. It's a very simple movie. Yeah, but I do think it's interesting to sit back then anyway, because most of the samurai films you see are from a later period than this. In fact, this is a
Mhm.
time when the Heian period was the time when the samurai began to sort of rise as a class, being becoming more important in society and becoming more powerful and influential. Also, what's interesting about that is this isn't to do with the movie, but like if you look up like the earliest history of samurai, at the time they were not noted for swordplay. They were known as great archers, and that was something that would change over. I don't know exactly when it happened, but around this time that probably still would have been the era of archery more. So samurais weren't really fully formed in their identity exactly, because nowadays, of course, we really associate them with swords. Although they did keep up the archery, a lot of samurai, of course, were still good archers anyway. But I think it really had to do with the Bushido code and all the rules they would set down, because the idea of swordplay or sword fighting, of course, was honorable combat, one on one. Like literally, um, Japan, when they would have wars with each other, and depending upon when this happened in the Heian period, it might have happened during a large civil war that was going on in Japan. Should I had the name of it? Let's see if I can find it again. There was a rather large conflict going on at one point of it. Damn it, I don't know. I had it. Anyway, it wasn't the Hogan Rebellion. Oh, the Genpei War. So or Genpei War, or however you say it, which was basically a big sort of civil war between two of the ruling clans. Anyway, what was I trying to say? Oh yeah, so during like that or some of those other conflicts, the way those wars were fought was when Japanese forces met each other in combat. It was very regimented and very about honorable. In that when you had like two sides charging to battle against each other, it wasn't nearly as chaotic as you see in other things. Because I'm sure chaos probably still broke off, but technically, the way the samurai were supposed to do it was they were supposed to pair off. You're supposed to find one guy on the other side, and you're supposed to have a one-on-one fight with him. And that was, it wasn't supposed to be as chaotic as like a battle normally is in a war. You were supposed to pair off and fight one-on-one. And once that was done, go find another opponent or partner and fight him honorably, which is one of the reasons why they had such trouble with the Mongols, that even though the Mongols did fail in their invasion, this would be in the 13th century, the Mongols blitzed them when they first showed up, one, because of a surprise attack, two, because they outnumbered them, but also the way they fought really confused the Japanese, because when the Japanese would step forward and say, send forth your warrior to fight this guy, they would just shoot like fire arrows at them or whatever. The Mongols weren't there for honorable combat. They were there to win. So they just fought however they would. And this actually was very difficult for the Japanese forces to adjust to. So anyway, that has really nothing to do with what's going on in this movie. There's some sword play, and there's two very different versions of a sword fight, as we'll get into it. So of course the movie's most famous for the whole motif that it's got going. It's about a single event as told by different witnesses, and how each gives a very different account of it. And at the time, that was a big deal. That was not really seen in cinema, not just in Japan, but worldwide. It's funny, Kurosawa would not often, but at least a few times, he would introduce some sort of storytelling motif that really had not been seen before in cinema.
Mm-hmm.
Like a couple years after this, when he did Seven Samurai, he kind of introduced the concept of what we would kind of now modern audiences might call like a cold open or something, where of course the whole point of the Seven Samurai is each guy gets sort of an introduction, although some longer than others. And one of the main samurai, I can't remember if it's Toshihiro Mifune, of course, in this movie too, if it's his character or not. But there's a part where early in the film, when his character's introduced, there's this whole thing where some bandit or crazy guy has taken a kid hostage, and the whole village is upset, and they don't know how to get him back. So they get this guy to try to get the kid back. And the whole thing is, it lasts maybe 10 minutes. And the point is, all it's there to do is introduce the character. It's not there to move the main plot forward. It doesn't have anything to do with the main plot. It's just showing us this guy, which happens all the time now. But that was not really something that was seen in cinema back then. And this is 1953, 54. So it's interesting. We take stuff like that for granted because it's everywhere all the time. But if you go back far enough, you can be like, this is the first time this happened. Especially when you're in the silent era, right?
It's a pretty common technique. I think it's even called the Rashomon effect, right? Or whatever they call it.
Yeah, people often use like Rashomon effect or Rashomon technique or whatever, which always just refers to again, it's not like it's the first story that ever did this, but it was the first sort of like big movie that did that. Before that, whenever movies showed us things, they showed us what really happened. And if people talked about it later, they might talk about it, but they didn't show it. This is the idea of having unreliable narrators and actually showing us their versions of events back to back against each other, which is a very interesting concept. And it's definitely why it's got noticed and is still talked about today.
Yeah, this was, I think, credited as the reason why the foreign language film was added.
It won the Oscar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it did win the Oscar for that, and it won some other sort of international type awards. What's funny is at the time, it was not that well received in Japan itself. Japanese critics were frankly baffled by like other countries, particularly the West, being interested in it. It even led them to say, perhaps the movie has Western sensibilities. And it's like, Kurosawa was just doing what he always did. And yet they were like, it's too Western. It's like, in what way is it Western? But that's sort of how people thought back then, I suppose. But yeah, as I said, before this movie, Kurosawa had mostly done films that were set in contemporary times that would have been post-war Japan. So this was sort of a real departure for him. And I don't know if it's because it was successful or maybe he liked it, but he did move into doing a lot of those movies after that. I'm not sure. Maybe if this movie wasn't as successful, it wouldn't have made any difference to him. Maybe he still had plans. I don't really know exactly the genesis of those other movies. But yeah, at the time, it performed pretty well at the box office in Japan, but as far as like critics went, they did not like it. So they'd say maybe just Western audiences liked it because it's kind of weird because the two statements sort of contradict each other. Because one they say is, oh, because there's something Western about it. The other is, oh, maybe Western audiences like it because they found it exotic. Well, I don't know. You could say that about like any Japanese movie, couldn't you? But for whatever reason, critics at the time were not that into it. But it was very well received again over here and in other countries. There's a thing here about the film appeared at the 1951 Venice Film Festival at the behest of an Italian language teacher, Giuliana Stramagoli, who had recommended to Italian film promotion agency Unitalia Films seeking a Japanese film to screen at the festival. However, Dale, or however you say it, Motion Picture Company, a producer of popular features at the time, and the Japanese government had disagreed with the choice of Kurosawa's work on the grounds that it was not representative enough of the Japanese movie industry, and felt that a work of Yosuhiro Ozu, who we mentioned, who we've covered, would have been more illustrative of excellence in Japanese cinema. But anyway, they did go ahead with it and won some things and won some sort of Golden Lion Award, which is something for Italians. I don't know. The Italian Critics Award as well. Oh, those are two separate things. The Italian Critics Award and the Golden Lion Award. But what's the Golden Lion? The Venice Film Festival. Okay, that makes sense. That's the highest. That's like the highest award at the Venice Film Festival. So yeah, that's a little kind of interesting that at the time, Japanese critics and I guess the government itself, because they were heavily involved, of course, in the film industry and I guess what movies would get seen in other countries or exported or whatever. But this movie did get some kind of release in the U.S. a year after in 1951. So.
Yep. Highest grossing Japanese film until Godzilla.
That's pretty cool. And the good news is, unlike Godzilla, it didn't get all bunch changed around. Like,
right.
When Godzilla first got released in the U.S., they added a whole American section to it with extra actors and everything. At least Rashomon, they didn't do that, and they didn't pull anything out because this is a short movie.
Yeah, it is.
It's only about 90 minutes long, and which is all kind of the more impressive. I always think of it in terms of something like Rear Window, or I think of like a movie that's just really efficient. It's not long at all, but it just gets everything across really efficiently. Like nothing's wasted, nothing feels tacked on or unnecessary. So I mean, obviously, a lot has to do with morality, I guess. Is sort of the big thing going on here. We're talking about an event that happens, a possible murder, and a sexual assault, and it's a little different in differing accounts by those involved for a couple of reasons. And one, the big one is like that the perpetrator, or at least the person that kicks it all off, the bandit, as played by Toshihiro Mifune, who would go on to star in many movies with for Kurosawa, and they would both become not just Japanese stars but international stars. His character, in his own version of the events, and the whole point of the movie, of course, is we don't know who's telling the truth. We don't know who's lying. We don't know if everybody's lying, that kind of thing. But I mean, in his version of events, he doesn't deny anything. And in fact, he takes full credit for both crimes. And the lies or whatever he says is more about the circumstances around them and how they were carried out is really what it's about. Because usually if you're going to do some sort of like multiple point of view type thing with characters talking about a crime, what they'll usually do is deny that they did anything and pin it on the other guy, right? Or say,
right.
And that's not what's going on here with the bandit. The bandit is only too happy to say that he raped the woman and killed the man. you know. But the whole crux here is that the telling is different. In fact, if you look at it, each character actually takes credit in either a direct or indirect way for the death of the samurai.
Mhm.
Because in the Bandit's telling, he's like, "We fought one-on-one, honorable combat, and I killed him." And in the second one, uh, the wife the wife says, what is it? She's just like, he was. It looked like he was going to kill himself, and then I passed out. And then when I woke up, he had the dagger in his chest. So, like, she couldn't confirm that he killed himself, but he probably did kill himself, and it was kind of my fault. And then, of course, I guess the one really weird thing about the movie is we're getting testimony from the samurai. And it's like, how do we get that? He's dead. And they just get it
Oh.
through a spirit medium, right? So
Mhm.
that's the one kind of really weird thing about the movie. So I guess to really fully accept that, I mean, you would have to just accept the supernatural. I don't know about most people, but I think that's impossible. I don't think dead people can give testimonies through medium. That's me. But I don't even know if that would have been accepted back then in like a legal sense. I know people believed in that stuff back then. They absolutely did. Spells and witchcraft and all sorts of things like that. But it is kind of interesting that, like, for an official inquiry with the authorities, they bring in a medium to speak for the dead guy. So that's kind of the one really weird part. But anyway, according to his story, he says he killed himself. He doesn't say the bandit did it.
Mhm.
So in each telling, uh, it's not about shifting blame around necessarily. It's just about shifting. I mean, each telling is done in such a way to make the person telling it seem sort of sympathetic. The bandit, of course, he has the unique position of, yes, he committed the crimes, but he still wants to tell it in a way that makes him sound cooler or better. Because it's just like, he says, like, I was really impressed by the woman because she was so fiery or whatever. She had a lot of spirit the way she fought back. He seemed to think
Mhm.
that was cool. And then he talked about how the fight he had with the samurai was fair. Like he cut him loose and they fought fair one on one. He said, he was a really good fighter. He crossed swords with me 23 times. No one's ever made more than 20 And the fight is depicted in his telling as kind of a skillful thing. I mean, there's
Yeah.
rough parts, but it shows that they're trying to show, two skilled opponents fighting each other until finally one gets the better of the other.
Mhm.
So he wants to tell it in that way. Of course, uh, when the woodcutter talks about him, because that's the secret witness. By the way, people, we talk about this all the. It's always understood when we do these shows, and I usually don't feel it necessary to say, but I will say for this one, we're doing full spoilers. So I'd really recommend, if you haven't seen the movie, to maybe hold off on watching this. But if not, we're just gonna go ahead here. It's not like it has a big twist in anything like that, but I just feel like this is a movie that, like, I don't know, I don't think you would really want to hear about before seeing, but I don't know. To each their own. People can use their own discretion on that. But because that's sort of the surprise thing, is that the woodcutter eventually reveals that he witnessed it too, that he lied to the authorities. Because this gets kicked
Mhm.
off, of course. Okay, let's back up. I don't need to tell everyone everything, but it's weird because it's a story kind of within a story. Because Rashomon is the broken down gate for this city that used to be in Japan that's not there anymore, and it's about three people that meet up, taking shelter from a big rainstorm in the gate, and two of them were together, the priest and the woodcutter, who were both called out as witnesses for this crime. And then there's just some random citizen that's there too, and he asks about it, so they're going to tell him. And when the woodcutter first says, he goes, I got called in. Why I got called into this is because when I was walking through the forest a few days ago, I stumbled upon the body and I
Yeah.
reported the crime to the authorities. So I got called in a few days later to give my testimony. And the big thing at the end is, after the other versions are given, he says, "Actually, I lied, telling them that I only came across the body. I saw what happened, and all three versions are lies. I'll tell you what really
Mhm.
happened." So that's kind of a little bit of a twist. But the way the film works is you don't necessarily have to believe that either. It's not like, okay, they all lied and that's the absolute truth. The point of the movie is you don't get to ever really know what the truth is. You have to sort of sort it out for yourself. The one thing you can say about the woodcutter, though, is, like, he has the least reason to lie because he was not directly part of it. But I mean,
Right.
he did lie about a part in the revelation about the dagger, right? Like, why did he keep quiet? And he said, I didn't want to get involved. You find out it was because the woman had a dagger with a pearl handle or pearl in the inlay or something like that. Anyway, something that could be considered pretty expensive and precious. And the reason he lied was so that, like, when he came upon the scene, or when he after it was over, he went in and stole the dagger so that he could, I assume, sell it for some money. So that's kind of a little bit of the twist in the movie there. But I mean, as far as the account he gives, he doesn't necessarily have a reason to lie. But yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, if he actually did steal it. I know it they hinted at it. So he did steal the dagger then to, I guess, feed his family.
Yeah, and I guess that's the other thing too. After the other guy says, "Well, you're accusing me of being immoral, and all these people are immoral, but you're immoral too because you stole the dagger." But then you find out that he's got all these kids, and it makes sense. And that's the other thing too. Like, everything's about people pronouncing moral judgments on each other, and we're skipping to the end here. But the thing the guy says, his sort of philosophy at the end is like, you don't have any right to judge me. His sort of thing is like, there's nothing wrong with being selfish. Selfishness is what's needed to get by in the world. Which, I mean, people will still make that argument today. But you can really understand it 800 years ago, not just in Japan, but anywhere. Because, I mean, we think about how harsh life can be now, but it's a lot better in most places than 800 years ago, where life was just, dismal and such a grind. I mean, death is a part of life, but death was really a part of life in those days. People died all the time. You get like you get a cut somewhere, it might get infected and you die, or they cut off your arm or something to stop something, but you still die anyway. You get some sort of fever or plague, and that's one thing they talk about too. Before they get into the stories, they're just saying like how crazy the world is. It's like there's war and there's famine and there's disease. It's so hard. So that's the other thing you can take into account. Like, well, the story's kind of timeless. It talks about people making moral decisions and righting and wronging each other, but then you can put in the context of, well, it was a harsher world too, and that whole philosophy of, yeah, you have to be selfish and every man for himself makes a little bit more sense in such a harsh time period. So that is a little bit kind of understandable, I guess. But I mean, the movie still ends on somewhat of a hopeful note, I guess, because of what happens with the baby. What I have to say, I mean, I remembered it, but for the baby thing is not a twist. It's not like something you thought was true wasn't true, or it's not a twist. But I have to say, the first time I saw this film many years ago, that's one of the most surprising things I've ever seen in a film. I was so like, what? When suddenly there among those three there was a baby. I don't know. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I was so surprised. It just seemed like such a weird, unexpected thing to happen. It wasn't a twist. It didn't have anything to do with what had happened before. It wasn't tied into the events or anything. I just was not prepared for it. I was really shocked.
Yeah, it's one complaint I would have to say is that baby is really annoying.
It does cry throughout the scene.
The entire final scene.
And you can say, well, that's realism. A real baby probably wouldn't just shut up so they can talk. But yeah, it is annoying to watch.
It doesn't make me like it anymore, though.
No, they're still talking. They're having their important discussion while this baby's going, ah! But it's not really that long. It just feels long because the baby's yelling. But I have to agree. But I mean, and I get what the baby adds to the story. It adds sort of, like we say, it adds a little bit of hope to something that was sort of dismal, because we'll go back, but again, since we're at the end here, like the woodcutter and the priest, particularly the priest, they're just saying, like, hearing all that and seeing all that, I'm losing my faith in mankind. Like, people are so terrible. And he says, like, if man can't trust men, like, we're already living in a hell. And the baby thing sort of brings a little bit of hope to that, because the woodcutter says, I'll take him home and I'll look after him. I've already got 6 kids of my own. One more is not going to make a difference. He can be in my family. And that makes the priest feel a lot better. And it also makes you feel better about the dagger. It's like, he didn't steal. He didn't pick up the dagger because he was greedy. He saw this as a way that he could help support his family in a really hard time. So
yeah, and like it matters anyway. I mean, who cares?
Yeah, like the woman didn't seem to want the dagger.
Yeah.
It was her dagger, but she never says anything about it or seems concerned that it's gone. She doesn't care. And I mean, why would she? Bigger things have happened, right? She was raped. Her husband's dead. In any version of the story, those things happened. You
Mm-hmm.
know, how they happened, the accounts differ, but it is an absolute fact that she was raped. It's an absolute fact her husband is dead at the end of it. Although everybody has a different version of how these things happen. So she went through something very terrible. So yeah, she doesn't really care about the dagger. So it is kind of a victimless crime that the woodcutter decided to take it for himself. But yeah, the citizen does try to turn that against him at the time. He's like, "You're no better than me or anybody else. It's like you lied, so you could steal a
Yeah.
dagger." Yeah.
You're a bandit calling me a bandit.
Yeah, exactly. So of course we've got Mifune as the bandit, whose name is his name is
I'll let you take a stab at that one.
Tajimuro, who is supposed to be a bandit of some renown. It's kind of funny too, because at first, like, you think, okay, he's this idiot that thinks like people know who he is, but apparently people do know who he is, because the guy that captured him said, "I knew who he was," and then I think in the woman's story when she's yelling at both of them and giving the reason you suck speech to both of them, saying that neither of them are men. Like, she's like, "I had heard of you and your cool reputation. I thought maybe you were a real man." So it's like, okay, I guess he does kind of have a bit of a rep going for him. Fair enough. It is an interesting portrayal because he's such a weirdo. He spends most of his time like bursting into laughter. What's funny also is, like, the first time I saw it, I wasn't sure I knew the whole thing was going to be differing accounts, right? The longest account you get, of course, is the bandits. And he tells you the whole setup. He says that he saw them in the woods. They went by him. He pretended to be asleep. But when he saw the woman, he had lust for the woman. His plan was, he's like, "I'm going to have that woman. Like, I don't necessarily need to want to kill the guy. I'll kill him if I have to, but if I can get her without killing him, that'd be cool." Was kind of what he's thinking. And then his thing is, I came across them, and of course he's a bit wary of me, but then I show him my sword to gain some trust, and I say, "Oh, there's this place where this mound where a bunch of swords and mirrors and things and valuables were buried, and I found them. That's how I got this cool sword. I'll sell them to you cheap." And this is not in anybody else's story, which is odd. I thought was kind of odd, because at the time watching it, I thought it definitely would be, because the setup itself already sounds fishy. It's like, how dumb is this samurai? You're walking through the woods alone with your wife, and this crazy guy who really looks like a bandit and is laughing all the time does his best to like lead you away, and you're like, "Yeah, okay, I'll go off with you and leave my wife alone." Like, for all he knew, he had like other bandit buddies that were going to like attack his wife as soon as he left. But he follows him a pretty far distance so that he can fall into the trap. So the first time I watched the movie, I expected like that might be different, but it's not. When you get the story as told by the woman and the medium, they pick up after the rape. So they're saying everything before that is what happened. They all agree on that, and I'm just like, this guy's a fucking idiot. This is like just myself and my wife, who I'm trying to protect, and I decide to like wander off into the woods with this strange crazy guy and leave her all alone, and I'm protected. Like, that's a pretty shitty samurai.
Hey, he likes swords, man.
He likes swords. It's like, I got a good deal on swords. You stay here, baby. But yeah,
By the way,
I actually, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I actually expected the first time I saw the movie that, like, when the other accounts came in, they would start earlier, and there might, I thought the samurai might have a different version of how he got like tricked or attacked. But apparently that all lines up. It's like, yeah, I'm an idiot. I went off with him and let him tie me up. Anyway.
Yeah. Speaking of swords, did you notice what he doesn't have a katana?
No.
The bandit.
Which makes sense. Katanas are hard to get.
It's like a Chinese sword that I actually looked up, and they look really cool. I may have to get one.
Yeah, I didn't know what kind of sword it was. I knew it wasn't katana, which I think lines up historically. Katanas are hard to come by. They're only supposed to belong to samurai. And now you could say, well, of course, a bandit could have one because he stole one or found one.
Is it just because of the craftsmanship that goes into it, like all the firing and making the blade hard and all that stuff? Is that what makes him so? Okay, makes sense.
Like, if you were like a peasant, like nothing you did could ever afford one. Like, you couldn't save up and buy one. I don't even know if you'd be allowed to buy one anyway, because as we said, there was a strict class system, and only samurai were really supposed to have them. Didn't mean people couldn't be armed, and as I said, because this takes place in the Heian period, I'm not sure exactly where the class systems stood and some of the traditions of the samurai, because this might have been a period when, as I said, the bow was more important and associated with samurai, although they did have swords. But at a certain point, the sorry, I got distracted. At a certain point, the katana became, their most important, not just weapon, but sort of item. It was like the most important thing that a samurai carried around and had with him. The sword. Swords would be passed on from father to son and so forth. By the time you get into, say, like the Edo period, you could have a samurai that has a sword that's like 300-400 years old, that's been in his family for generations. So that also added to their value, of course.
Wow.
But yeah, I think it was a good detail that the bandit didn't have a katana, because probably under most circumstances he wouldn't have one.
I forgot what it was called. Chinese Jian. J-I-A-N.
I'm not sure. I don't know as much about Chinese weapons.
I don't really either,
Japanese
but
ones.
you immediately notice that it's double-sided, two-sided sword, so that really gives it away.
And this would also, another thing that's notable at the Heian period is this is sort of the height of Japanese culture being influenced by Chinese culture, because a couple centuries before that, some envoys from China had come over, and they said, "Hey, you should send some envoys to us." So at a certain point, of course, this takes years to do because of distance and everything. But some Japanese envoys, they went to China, and they went to the imperial capital, and they looked around, and they were treated very well. When they came back, they were really excited. They told everybody at the court that the Chinese really had their shit together, and we should do what they do. So, which is one of the reasons why Japan has such a baffling writing system, because I think I've talked about this before. The Chinese language and the Japanese language have no common ground. They are in no way related. There's nothing that connects them. And yet the Japanese use a system of writing based on Chinese writing. They just did that because they wanted to. They're like, let's just make things really complicated for ourselves. And to this day, that is still part of, not kanji, but the higher one that they use. It's still based on all that. So, but yeah, this would have been the period where anything sort of Chinese was seen as like high culture, and it would be associated with like the imperial court. They saw them as something that was to be emulated. So yeah, I guess some weapons would find their way over. Makes sense.
Very cool. Let's see. This is yet another movie that's on the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die by Steven Schneider.
Yeah, I figured quite a few Kurosawas are on there.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure Yojimbo's on there. That's
right. And for a bit of digression, I'll explain sort of how I arrived at this one, because we were talking about there were 3 or 4 Kurosawas we were thinking about doing. But the reason why this one popped into my head, not just because I actually had it, was because I recently watched a fairly new film. I watched what's his name? Okay, hold on. Ridley Scott. I watched the Ridley Scott film, The Last Duel. And The Last Duel is also set around the same time period, but it's set in France. And I think it's about true life events. It's about a duel that was fought between 2 guys, or 2 squires. About the time the duel was fought, one of them had been knighted, but who knew each other. And the duel was fought over the accusation by the knight's wife that the squire had raped her. And it's a real historical account. And the way the movie's told is it gives 3 accounts. So that's what made me think of it.
Okay. So similar.
Right. It's much longer and more elaborate than this movie. Like, it's all like more than an hour longer than this movie. And each section, it goes in chapters. It's like chapter 1, this guy's version of events, chapter 2. And the difference, and there's a difference too, because it's not just the diversion of the events as they happen, but also it just shows stuff that happened beforehand. So one person's story will have something that happened that another person did not witness, that was not part of. It's not a bad movie. It's the one that has Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and Adam Driver in it. I don't remember the name of the actress. It did really poorly at the box office. It came out in the fall, but I mean, it's hard to judge anything's performance at the box office during these COVID years.
Lately, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Like, I mean, it didn't do as well as Bond or Dune, but I don't know if that means it was like terrible. Anyway, I thought it was a pretty good movie. Not great, it's but it was a good movie. I expected to be distracted by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck in such a setting, but it's not that bad really. Adam Driver's very good. He's good in most things. So anyway, that's why I thought of this movie because I'm like, well, it's taking a page from that. It's about differing accounts, and it's also about a rape.
Yeah,
and both movies have make a good point about, and of course, it works as a good parallel to our society now. Especially it feels like Jay and I talk about this all the time. It pops up, because of events actually happening and because of all the documentaries I've watched recently. Like I just watched the last episode of We Need to Talk About Cosby, the 4-part thing about Cosby, which is very good. I
want to check that out.
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. But my point is, gender politics and the way women are treated in society. And of course, this is almost 1,000 years ago, so not well. They're not treated well, and you see that in both films, really, where the woman, again, regardless of whose story is true, it's indisputable, and that's funny too. So you might think in Adam Driver's, when it shows Adam Driver's his arc or whatever, his version, it's not quite as direct, but he still does rape her. It's not like he says in the court, like, I absolutely did, I didn't touch her. Like, he pretty much lies. We know he's lying in that one. It's a little bit different, but but it has also to do with sort of medieval attitudes towards that. Because his idea is because when he comes and tells he's sort of friends with a higher ranking guy as played by Ben Affleck. And he's like, well, did you rape her? It's like, I need to know. And he's just like, well, she made the usual protests. She's a married woman. She said the usual. So you get to see the scene where he rapes her twice, and they're not that different. They're barely any different. I think that's the point, because the point is Adam Driver's character, he still doesn't really feel like what he did was rape, really. And what she has to deal with is just awful. And it's not as bad in this movie, although at least as far as the interrogation goes, because this becomes a whole thing. He brings it to the king and everything is involved. But the whole thing is she's like being cross-examined and asked about it. And they're saying, well, maybe you liked it, is one thing. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things also is she's married to Matt Damon's character, and it seems, and they're unable to conceive. And then shortly after the rape happens, she's pregnant, right? So it seems pretty clear to the audience, okay, obviously Matt Damon has some fertility issues. He was the issue. And now that she's, been raped by Adam Driver and she's pregnant, there you go. But what they say, and this is what they believed in France at the time and other parts of Europe, they say, well, it's impossible to conceive a child if the woman does an orgasm. They say, you can't get pregnant from a rape, is what they say. Wow. And they're like, this is a scientific fact, is what the lawyer's saying. And that's what they believed. It is true. They believe that. So you have this woman saying, so they have this one saying, because they're like, do you enjoy having relations with your husband? She's like, yes, of course. It's like, well, it seems like you enjoyed it a little with this guy too, It's like, so it's really interesting how far we've come and how far we've not come, because you still get a lot of that victim blaming and some of that, well, what were you doing and did you like it? And it's kind of funny in this movie, as he tells it, he does admit to rape her, but the way they show it is it shows her hand touching his back and stuff. It's like, oh, but then he doesn't use the words. He doesn't say then she gave in and she was into it, but it just shows it. It's because that's kind of the way he thought it. She was impressed that I was so virile and awesome, so she was into it.
Going back to how women are treated around this time, he was ready to be done with her. He was so ashamed that she was raped.
Oh yeah, her husband, right?
Yeah, her husband, right?
So in every version of events, her husband is not supportive, and is just so ashamed of her. In the wife's version, he's the worst. He says, he basically calls her a whore. Because in the Bandit's version, he rapes her, says, "Hey, come with me," and she's like, "No," and he's like, "Okay, fine," and he leaves. And he's like, and then I left them, and I was going to leave them, but then I got called back, and I had to free him and fight him, and I fought him fair, and then I left. But yeah, in various versions, he said, I tried to persuade her, I didn't just rape you because I'm horny, but I'm in love with you. Why don't you marry me? And he's acting like it's so weird that she's rejecting him. He's like, but the bitch rejected me. Like, yeah, as you said, like attitudes towards women. Like, imagine being the woman in the middle in this. On the one side, you have your rapist, and on the other side, you have your husband that hates you for being raped and blames you, like it was your fault or your idea or something. And in that version, right, in her version, the thing was, uh, when the husband gets called on to like defend her honor, he says, "No, I'm not risking my life for such a woman. She's not worth it." Oh my god. So he doesn't come out well in any of them. Even in the even in his version of the events as told by the medium, he still doesn't come off so well.
Why did she, like, what reason did she have to not say that the bandit killed him? Like, because in her version, he or she assumes he killed himself, right?
Yes, yeah. I know it is weird, and is it? I mean, part of it probably has to do. She does have a lot of anger at her husband. She was raped by this guy, but she definitely has anger at her husband, and she certainly doesn't like the story. I guess she certainly doesn't like the story that the bandit gives. That he and I fought in honorable, awesome combat, and I managed to beat him. Like she's like, no, like fuck that. Like whether it happened or not, that was not the version she was going to give. In her version, her husband wouldn't fight for her at all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like, and in that one, she's begging her husband to forgive her for the crime of being raped, and he won't forgive her. And then she says, "Then kill me."
Mm-hmm.
And instead, she faints, and then when he wakes up, he's dead, apparently by his own hand. And then she says, I tried to drown myself, but I failed.
Mm-hmm.
And that really was sort of your options as a married woman who was raped. If you're a married woman, that's what we're saying. Like both guys make arguments, like you've known two men, like that makes you evil and terrible. Right. Again, as if the rape was her idea or something. Like she went, like, it's so infuriating, but that's how things were. And that was usually and this was in China too. There were certain places like China and Japan and probably some of those other East Asian countries. Like if you had like say a young woman who wasn't married, and maybe she was a virgin or something like that. Her options usually, if she had premarital sex or even was raped, was like, I should just kill myself. That was like what they were told to do.
This is just, they're all about honor, right? It's like,
yeah,
it's everything.
Exactly.
And they still are, really. And, much more so than, America, for God's sakes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's always the thing about that world back then, because you only had, again, you didn't really have sort of a middle ground. You either had a woman that was chaste and only had sex if she got married, and then she was faithful to her husband until she died. And if she got raped or something, I guess she'd kill herself. And then you had like filthy prostitutes. You didn't have any middle ground. You didn't have a woman that went on dates and maybe slept with a guy and went on dates and slept with a guy and then eventually got married, like, which seems very normal in today's society. Like that didn't exist. It was either completely chaste version and maybe she got married and was faithful to one man, or she's like a prostitute banging every guy around for money. There's no in between there. So yeah, it's pretty rough. But yeah, I've read a few different Chinese novels from like back in sort of that era. And a few times I've come across scenes of like, you'll have like a young Chinese maiden and there'll be a guy that she actually likes. And like, he's kind of like wooing her and she likes him. And like, maybe they're making out a little and stuff like that. And she'll be like, stop. And he's like, oh, I can't stop myself. She's like, you're going to have to stop because if we have sex, I swear I'll kill myself. If you dishonor me, I'll be forced to kill myself. And the guy's like, well, I don't want that. And then he has to leave. Like that was like a normal way of like putting men off, even if you liked the man. Just like, okay, we got to slow down and put things into context here. Like if we have sex, I'll have to kill myself.
I'm warning you.
So not a great situation for women, said, and it's been a very long, slow haul for women because I mean, we joke about how just a few decades ago, like how sexist the world was, but I mean back then, I mean, geez, and that's the thing. again, in the European thing that was in or okay, I'm losing myself, but I mean in European society, like in the last duel, like that's what the woman more or less feels like. She's just this piece of property. You have a father who marries you off to whoever, and then you do your wifely duty, and if you don't pump out a bunch of kids, there's something wrong with you. And it's a real lose-lose situation to be a woman, even if you're in higher society, like she happened to be, or even in this, like, this is the wife of a samurai, so she's not like a peasant woman, but still, in the eyes of the law or the society, she's not really worth that much just being a woman.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, you have the indignity, the tragedy of being raped, and then having your husband, who was tied up and forced to watch it, acting like all disgusted by you, as if it as if it's your fault, or as if you wanted it or something. So that's kind of a timeless thing that you can apply to all sorts of different points in history and sorts of different parts of the world and societies. It's sort of the shitty position women have historically been in. And as we said today, things are a lot better, but you still go through the same thing when you have a woman, especially if you accuse somebody of rape, because I mean, you've already been wrong. A very terrible crime has happened to you, and yet it
Mhm.
has to get worse if you're going to like come forward and talk about it. This is a little different because again, nobody's denying the rape happened. The bandit is even somewhat proud of it, as you might expect, because of differing attitudes again, and it's not like he's a good moral guy. So it is a little different because when you think again, if you think about a movie or a story that has differing accounts of a crime, you expect like the parties to disagree on maybe who committed the crime. But no, the bandit, in all versions, the bandit rapes her. In all versions, the husband dies one way or another because of
Mhm.
the rape. That's not in dispute. It's just sort of the circumstances surrounding them and how things happen. And of course, when the samurai gives his own account of things, it's pretty funny too. Well, not funny. It's kind of awful in a way that makes it funny. After so after the rape, once again, in the samurai's version, Tajimaro says, come with me, and in that version, she's the bad guy because she accepts. She says, "Okay, I will come with you, but first you have to kill my husband," is what she says.
Mhm.
If you're gonna have me, you have to have me fully. You're gonna have to kill him. So now she's a real evil villain in it because she's saying that,
Right.
and then and then and Tajimaro, and again, he gives more credit to Tajimaro than his wife in his version because Tajimaro acts totally up in this version. Tajimaro is totally shocked by her saying that, like, "What? You want me to kill your husband?" And doesn't seem like he wants to do it at all. And then he speaks directly to the samurai, and he says, should I let her go? I mean, I could just kill her for you. And
Right.
then he has the line, for these words alone, I was ready to pardon his crime. I mean,
Yeah.
Jesus, this man accosts you, rapes your wife in front of you, and then says, and again, this is his version of events, and then and propositions your wife to run off with him, and then your evil wife is like, yeah, I will, but kill my husband first. And then and the bandit is so shocked by her behavior that he's like, he defers to me, and he says, I could just leave her, or I could kill her for it if you wanted. And I thought that was cool. That was stand up. I was ready to let the rape go because that was like, because that was good behavior apparently that I was impressed with. So I mean, Jesus Christ, it's just so unfathomable. Which is one of the reasons why the woodcutter is so sure that they're all lying. And you might remember the opening lines of the movies: the woodcutter shaking his head and saying, "I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all." Because as he says, like they're giving really differing accounts that have to be, they don't line up. They directly contradict each other, but none of them really seem like the obvious kind of lies you'd expect. I mean, he's saying what we're all thinking by the time it's over. It's like, yes, like if they are lying, why don't they make themselves look better here, or make this
Right.
person look worse there? It's like, what weird details. So we'll get to so we'll do this really quick. So to try to keep things going is after the rape, everybody agrees on the events leading up to the rape, and then there's a rape. So in the bandit story, the wife is really ashamed, and she begs him to let the husband go. so that he has a chance to fight for her honor. Because she says, one of you has to die. I've known 2 men. One of you has to die. Said, will
Mhm.
you let my husband, and don't murder my husband. Let him go and have a fair fight with him, and whoever wins wins. That's the Bandit's version of it. And in that version, he and the samurai have an awesome, cool fight, but he eventually gets the better of him and wins. And then sometime during that, the wife ran away, and he couldn't find her. So that's his version of events. The wife's version of events is that after the rape, she begs her husband to forgive her as if she'd done something wrong, but he won't even look at her or looks at her really mean or cold. So then she frees him and says, "Oh, just kill me then so I can be at peace." And he refuses. And then she faints. And then when she wakes up, it looks like he's killed himself. So that's her version of events. The samurai story, as told by, I guess, his spirit, because he is dead, let's remember, is that after the rape, Tajimuro says to her, come with me," and she accepts and says, "But I
Right.
can't go with you unless you kill my husband first." That's the deal. And then he's so shocked by this that he talks over her and talks directly to the samurai and says, "I could kill her or I could let her go." The samurai is moved by this and is like, "I'm ready to forgive him for that." And then the woman takes off. Tajimuro chases her and can't find her, and then just decides to let the samurai free. And then the samurai, because of, I guess, the overwhelming shame or guilt or whatever dishonor of the situation, does successfully kill himself. So that's the stories we've got. And then the woodcutter comes in and says, "They're all lying. I was actually there. I lied to the magistrates or whatever when they told me. I actually watched the rape and the murder, but I didn't tell anybody." So
Mhm.
in rhyme, after the rape, Tojimaro begs the samurai's wife to marry him, and instead she like dodges him and eventually manages to free the husband. But the husband does not really want to fight Tajimaro, saying that she's not worth it.
Right.
That's when the wife flips out on both of them and says how they're both not really men. He won't defend her honor, and this guy, I don't know, isn't willing to follow through. Both it basically is, you're willing to rape me, but you're not willing to kill for me. Is basically what she says to them. It's like, you're my husband, you're not willing to fight for my honor. You raped me, but you're not willing to kill my husband for me. Is what she's saying to them. And so she sort of shames them into fighting. And again, this is the woodcutter story, and they have a fight, and it's really lame and clumsy because neither of them wants to do it in this version. This version, neither of them really wants to do it. They're both super afraid of getting killed. They have a really clumsy, shitty fight with like no skill, and eventually Tajimaro wins the fight by sheer luck and kills him. And then after that, the woman flees again, and he can't catch her and leaves. So those are all 4 versions of the story. So you have the most reason to believe the last one because why would the woodcutter lie? But there's nothing ever that's concrete. The other thing that's interesting about the way that the story is told is we don't know what the ruling was. They told the cops these stories. We have no idea what the cops decided. I say cops.
That's
It's
true.
funny, and they show in the translation they say police, but they wouldn't really had a word for police back then. I'm not sure who, whatever the government authorities would have been, but anyway. But yeah, like that's deliberately left out. We don't know how the case went or anything like that. We don't know what happened to these people afterwards. I mean, the bandit is definitely something's going to happen to him because he freely admitted to the crime, and he's a known bandit and he's been caught before, so he's not getting away. The
You would
husband is
assume
dead,
so,
so
but
well,
he just kind of leaves at the end, right? He just kind of goes away. The bandit.
I mean, at the end, but I mean, remember that's all flashback. Well, I mean, there's flashback within a flashback, but I mean, he is caught. He's telling the story after he got captured, right? He's bound, so we don't know what happened to him after that. I assume some sort of punishment.
Right. But at the very end, though, when he's with the amulet on the baby, like that's not a flashback, right?
Yeah, but that's not him.
Oh, that's not him. Okay.
Right? Remember, that's all other flashback. The story of of the account is being told by the woodcutter. He's the only one that
Okay.
was there. So it's the woodcutter, the priest, and the random guy. That's who's
That's
there at the
right.
end. The
That's
random
right.
guy tried to take the amulet from the baby.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, he was in custody again. Tajimaro was in custody, so I assume he got locked up or killed or something. The woman, I guess, just had to leave in disgrace, and the samurai is dead. But we never actually find out the official ruling, like what they decided really happened, which again is
Right.
partially so that we don't really know either. So the whole point again is you don't know.
It's open ended.
There's not really much reason for the woodcutter to lie, but you do wonder if there's stuff like he mixed up or got wrong. But the whole point is, like, once you get through the woodcutter story, because each person before the woodcutter told the story to make themselves seem the most sympathetic in it.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time you get to the woodcutter, it's like they all suck. You know, Tajimaru's story is kind of like a traditional, almost sort of it's all about his pride, you know, and that's how the characters come across. He's supposed to be portrayed as he's sort of cunning and brave. Even though the woman is a victim of him, he says like he's really impressed by like her spirit. Because remember, he talks about how she really fought back and everything, and he thought she was fiery, and he respected her for that. And he says like the samurai that he fought was a really good samurai who had a lot of prowess, and he was a difficult fight. He was a worthy opponent that he slays in duel to the death. In the wife's version, everything's through like her own lens of, you know, being a victim and how bad things were. So in her version, Tojimuro is basically just a violent maniac who takes off after raping her, and she's a helpless victim denounced by her own husband, who won't even defend her or speak to her. So then in the deceased samurai's telling, it's all about making his own victimhood the most important thing, and how much he despises the other parties. You know, Tajimaru's a violent thug who actually is not the worst villain in it. It's more like his wife is a full-blown villain, because after this thug rapes her, she says, "I'll go with you, but first kill my husband." You know, so she's the main villain in his version of the things, and he's being a noble samurai. The only thing he can do is have like an honorable suicide. So, you know, 3 wildly conflicting stories, each told by the person trying to make themselves out to be the most sympathetic party in it. And then when you finally get to what the woodcutter's version of events is, it's like, it's all sort of about seeing the worst in humanity from all the angles. It's all the worst version of themselves. Toshimaru is like a perverted, moronic idiot. The wife is basically in the middle of some sort of mental and emotional breakdown, and she's lashing out at everybody around her. And the samurai is basically a misogynistic jerkass who dies pathetically begging for his life. Because remember, not like a samurai would go out at all. Because after he loses the sword and Hazumaru gains the sword, he chases him around for a bit. When he's finally alive, he's like, "No, don't kill me. I don't want to die," which is like the worst way a samurai can die, right? Pleading for your life. So in his version, it's like the worst of everybody. So.
Well, it's kind of like an allegory, like for a lot of things. I don't know if they've applied it to a lot of things. And then faith in humanity is restored at the end. So,
right, for the priest, because the priest is the most disillusioned by all this. He wasn't part of it. He just heard it, or he was the first witness called. But all he could testify to was like he saw the samurai and his wife go into the woods. That was his own part in the thing. Before they went into the woods, he saw them. That's why he was a witness. But yeah, the whole thing really depresses the shit out of him and makes him lose faith in humanity. And then he regains it a little when the woodcutter says he's going to adopt his abandoned baby. It's pretty interesting too. So they find out this whole time they've been talking, there's been an abandoned baby over in the corner in like a kimono with an amulet on it. And he goes over to steal the kimono and the amulet. And they're like, "How dare you?" He's like, "Hey, how dare me? What about this kid's shitty parents? They had their fun and then they abandoned him." And I can't remember if it's the priest or I think it is the woodcutter. The woodcutter's like, "We don't know. It might have been really hard for them to leave him. And look, they left him with an amulet. That's supposed to be for protection." So he makes it sound like these people that abandoned their child are actually good people, which is an interesting spin on it. And then
they're having a tough
the whole
time.
thing of them lashing out at each other. It's like, "You call me a thief, but I figured it out. You lied to them so that you could get the dagger." And he doesn't answer because he is ashamed by it. So yeah, it's everybody pointing fingers at each other every which way. And yeah, and he has that, and the citizen or peasant or whatever he is, you know, he has that sort of little speech, as I said before, about like there's nothing wrong with being selfish. It's what we have to do to get by in life. So don't, call me immoral or bad if I'm being selfish, because being selfish is what's required for survival. And the woodcutter seems to almost believe this. But then after he and the priest have a little talk, and he says, well, I'll take this kid in. The priest's like, no, humanity's okay. You're a good man. You're going to take care of this baby. So that's a little help. And of course, this whole time they've been sheltering from the rain. And it breaks up the rain ending. And as they walk away, it's a nice last shot. The clouds sort of part and the sun comes out. I mean, it's a little harder to appreciate in black and white, which is one of the things, like, pretty much any Kurosawa movie from the past, I'm happy to see in black and white. This one, I think, could benefit from color because of the use of light. A couple of years ago when we did our Masters of Film for our Kubrick film, we did Barry Lyndon, and Barry Lyndon was famous, one of its things, for being shot with like almost all natural light and candlelight, no artificial lighting. Apparently, it seems like this movie predates that, and Kurosawa did it first because he didn't want artificial lighting, because they had this whole thing about wanting to just use the actual sunlight, but the sunlight wasn't bright enough, but they used a bunch of mirrors to reflect it through the trees, which is harder to pick up on in black and white. So it would be kind of interesting to see a colorized version. But I think that is pretty creative.
Well, and the rain, I think they added some sort of dye to the rain because it wouldn't show up.
Yeah, because the cameras wouldn't pick it up. Yeah, I read that. That's on the Wikipedia page.
That's pretty interesting.
That's kind of interesting. Yeah, when you think about some of that, when you're looking at a movie this old, some of the challenges that the filmmakers come up with for technical stuff we take for granted now, of course. What was it? It was and I had it. Lighting, blah blah blah.
Well, and before I forget, this is available on archive.org, as are quite a few of Kurosawa's films, the Criterion release. And this looks to be in HD. It looked great.
Yeah, the one I saw, it said it was from a restoration from 2008.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the same or not, but there was the thing I saw had a little disclaimer at the start saying that.
Probably so. Oh, yeah, this one, yeah. It said something. I wasn't paying attention. It's the Criterion release, so I'm sure it probably is that one.
Yeah. But since in the flashback stuff, all the stuff about like the light coming through the trees, it's harder to appreciate in black and white. So it would have been kind of interesting to see in color to give you sort of a better sense of it. Because as I've said many times, when you're doing a black and white movie, one of the things that gets heightened and makes it look better sometimes is when you have like light and shadow, and that can really be played up. And this, it's less about shadow and more about light. So I almost feel like seeing it in color, you could benefit from that. It's pretty interesting. Because this is like a terrible crime, and it happens in like bright sunlight.
Yeah.
And then you've got the framing device of the people talking about it, and it's in the heavy rain. That just makes me think of sadness, like weeping or something, right? And then of course it has the hopeful ending of the sun coming out again for maybe a nicer day. It was only a few years later that, speaking of, again, Masters of Film, a very famous film by Swedish filmmaker Ingmar Bergman. He did the what is it? Is it The Rites of Spring? I think it's called The Rites of Spring, which is not that similar, but it is about like a rape. Right? It's the movie that that Wes Craven kind of was inspired by when he made Last House on the Left. Because in The Rites of Spring, also set in a medieval time, in like medieval Sweden, it's about like a young girl who's out and some bandits come across her and violently rape her and kill her. And then later, the bandits ask to have shelter at the house, and not knowing that it's the family of the girl. And the farmer and his family eventually find out, and they take their revenge, which is the same thing that happens in Last House on the Left. But that movie is just more straightforward, and it's about revenge and violence, really. But they do remind me of each other. They're both from the 50s. They're both black and white, and they're both set in a medieval time period, and they center around a rape. Although this one, it's interesting because the rape victim survives, which is not worse, of course, but it does sort of highlight again the attitudes towards women and rape at the time, just the way she's being treated by her. In all the versions of the events, her husband is not very supportive. Even in the husband's own story, where he's trying to make himself sound good, he's just saying, well, she, after being raped, she liked it so much she decided she would go off with the bandit, and then she told him to kill me. So. But I think it's called The Rites of Spring. I'm gonna double check that. Oh, The Rite of Spring, no S. The Rite of Spring. Or no, that's not it either. Hold on. It's something spring. Okay.
I was thinking I didn't sound quite right, but I'm not very versed in Bergman.
It's something spring, goddammit. Hold on.
Virgin Spring?
Yeah, it's the Virgin Spring. For some reason I thought it was Rites of Spring. But yeah, it's a Virgin Spring. Mm-hmm. Anyway, good movie. This reminded me a little of it, although that movie's darker than this and more violent, and because it's about revenge, and the rape is worse. This we only see the start. It's like a lot of older ones, we sort of see the start and then it cuts out. That's the other thing too. It's like we don't even know how long the rape lasted or how intense it might have gotten or anything like that. Because it always jumps that. Because if you take out like how long the rape was, which we don't know, the events themselves aren't that long. It's maybe 15, 20 minutes each time. Because even both versions of the story of the sword fight, although they're very different from each other, they're both kind of long. One is like a long, skillful battle between evenly matched opponents, and the other is between two idiots that are too afraid to fight and aren't very good at it and stumble around until one of them gets lucky and kills the other. But both match up to both being about the same length. But yeah, the Virgin Spring. 1960, so a decade after that, but anyway, it's one of the I guess actually probably it was influenced by Rashomon a bit, I think. Max von Sydow's in it. I haven't seen it in a few years. Actually, I think the last time I saw it was back when we did the Bergman thing, because I watched several Bergman films before we picked the one we picked, which is kind of an outlier, because we did Hour of the Wolf.
Oh yeah.
Because around the time I know I also watched the Magician, which is an interesting movie. Yeah, okay, Virgin Spring. I said the Rites of Spring. It's Virgin Spring.
Have you ever seen 13 Assassins?
No, it's on my list.
This has got me in the mood to watch.
That's a more recent one, isn't it?
2010.
Yeah, I've heard it's like one of the better ones from like more recent years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's on my list.
That'd be a fun one to do. If you could track it down sometime. I think I've got it on Blu-ray.
Sure. Oh, cool.
I'll tell you what, if you'd be interested, I can upload that to the Vimeo, and you could watch it that way if you can't find it any other way.
Yeah, we might do that.
I was thinking that may be a way for us to see. The problem, guys, is we've always had problems getting on the same track because our streaming services don't offer the same stuff. So
yeah,
if we actually find a movie that we both want to do, then we have to both have access to it. So
this is actually a really old recording for me. I recorded this off TCM like 2 years ago. This is why I happen to have it, because while a couple of other Kurosawa films have shown up on Crave, most recently Ran, or however you say it, that one's not actually on there. I also still have Seven Samurai recorded too. Classic. Which maybe we'll get to someday, but yeah, I would definitely do, a couple other Japanese directors too, because I know so far we've done 3 Kurosawas and 1 Ozu, and there's lots to do besides that. And also, if you talk about them in the context of sort of the big 3, well, that means there's one that we're missing, and that is sort of the forgotten one of the time period. His name is
Fortress?
Kinsey Mizoguchi.
Oh, okay.
So Kinsey Mizoguchi is sort of the forgotten one of the big 3 of the Japanese directors. Of course, there's plenty of Japanese directors, but I mean, and his most famous one is Yujetsu, which I would love to do sometime. I haven't seen it in years. Really interesting film. It's also a period piece, but it's got ghosts in it and stuff. It's a really interesting movie. Really great soundtrack too.
Which one was that?
Yeah, Yujetsu,
Oh, okay.
1953.
I don't think I've seen that one.
That's Kinsey Mizuguchi. He's kind of the overlooked one.
Oh, okay, I got you.
I've seen one of his other films. I think I saw The Life of Oharu. But just like Ozu, he died young. He was only 58 when he died. So he was like still making films when he died. But that's really the priority. That's the one I really want to do. He did a ton of films too, because like Ozu, he started in the silent era. So he did quite a few silent films that are now lost.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if anybody's wondering about the silent era, Japan silent era was longer than any other film industry country. So by the time you get into the early 30s, when sound has come in, there's still some Japanese silent films. So when the last silent film actor or whatever dies, they'll probably be a Japanese person, because they made silent films as late as like 33 or maybe even 34. Whereas by in Hollywood, they were done by like 1930.
Mm-hmm.
Ozu also had some silent films that are lost films. But
lost just because the film stock, it was on the nitrate or whatever.
For some of it, and some of it was just generally just lost. Like, people do not know what happened. Like, if it got stored in some warehouse or something, there's all sorts of different things. I always love looking up lost films. There's some really famous ones. It's really interesting stuff. I mean, if there's a big Wikipedia article all about lost films, and about 80% of them are from the silent era. Then there are others that have lost because of that, but like most of them, they're from the silent era. And some films that were lost from the silent era were rediscovered decades later when somebody found the negatives or whatever, the prints somewhere. Some really interesting stuff there. But getting back to Ozu, I think the one I kind of wanted to do, because speaking of that, and I don't know if we could do it or not, is that Ozu is one of those directors, and we've done this before, who actually remade his own film. He did a movie called A Story of Floating Weeds, and that was a silent film in the 30s, and came out in 34. So again, pretty late period silent for most of the world. And then in 1959, he made Floating Weeds, which is a remake of it, which is not only, of course, not a sound film, but so late in Ozu's career, there's actually one of his only color films. So I always thought it would be cool to watch those and do a comparison of them.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah, this study here says that 75% of the original silent era films have perished.
Wow, 75% even. Yeah.
So that's more than I expected.
Yeah. Plus, we've never actually done a silent film.
Yeah.
As always said, I'm open to it. They're just so different. A silent film is so different.
Yeah.
But I thought that was one of the things that would make it more worthwhile doing a silent one, because we would have like a direct remake to compare.
That's a good point.
So yeah, that's something I've thought about. So, and of course there are more contemporary Japanese directors too, and we'll get into that as we go. There's some interesting Japanese filmmakers, because I know right now this is our third Kurosawa, and we've done one Ozu, but we're aware, and we do want to do some other Japanese directors too, of course. So hopefully we'll be able to get to them before too long. But yeah, I compare this movie actually quite a lot to Rear Window, because Rear Window is also sort of short and simple. And of course, Rear Window is a single location movie. It all takes place in that apartment and the view out the window. This movie's not quite that simple, but it only has 3 locations. It has the woods area where the events happened. It's the Rashomon gate where it's being recounted. And then of course there's the wherever they are in the city or whatever when they're all giving their testimony, which I think is interesting. It's also an interesting storytelling technique that we never see the interrogators or hear their questions. We just, as the camera, we're seeing what they would see. It's like we're interrogating them, which is kind of a neat technique. Maybe it's not that creative or original nowadays, but it probably was back then. I kind of liked that we didn't actually have like actors playing, law enforcement officials or magistrates or whatever questioning them. Instead, they just put the camera here and put it on them, and they just answered as if they were being asked questions, which I thought was kind of cool. A neat way of doing things. Yeah, I guess technically Rashomon is like considered like as a term, like a psychological effect, like the Rashomon effect.
Mm-hmm.
The situation in which an event is given contradictory interpretations or descriptions by the individuals involved. Storytelling and writing method in cinema, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it comes with a much more common motif that had barely been used before this, but really used because it's got multiple points of views, which is the unreliable narrator, which is something we've dealt with on films we've done here before. Although I can't really remember which ones, but I know we've talked about it before. But this is interesting because this gives us several unreliable narrators, and we know it's unreliable because they're giving conflicting accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So nowadays you get a Rashomon style plot. I remember one of the more interesting episodes of my favorite show, Batman the Animated Series, did this. It was an episode called POV, and it's centered around several Gotham cops and Batman having a confrontation with some gangsters at a warehouse. And they all give their and it's about the cops. There were 3 cops involved. 2 were together. One was Detective Montoya, and she was partnered with some rookie, and they were together. And of course, Harvey Bullock, the grizzled detective who mostly doesn't like Batman, he had his version of events too. So it's their 3 versions of events, and it's about how they got the tip that these crooks were going to be at the warehouse for some reason. Bullock and Batman, of course, shows up, and the whole thing was like it's a debacle. They don't arrest anybody, and it ends with them nearly getting killed as the warehouse burns to the ground. But the way the episode is told is interesting in that it's different from this, because the way this movie works is as we're given the story, we're shown events as the witness says it. In POV, the Batman episode, we see what really happened, but the narration is different. It sometimes conflicts with what we see. Like, for instance, Bullock is the only one who outright lies, as you might expect. Bullock tells some lies to make himself sound better. Like, at one point, he's sneaking up on the bad guys who are trying to open this safe, and he steps on something, and they hear him, and he's like, "But then they heard noise. Must have been Batman." But it wasn't Batman. It was you, fucking Bullock, and you know it. But Montoya's is the most accurate because she's level-headed, and the rookie, he doesn't lie. He just sometimes doesn't see things properly. Like, he says he sees Batman fighting these guys out in the alley outside, and he says like sparks flew out of his fingers and things like that. Like, he almost makes it sound like Batman has supernatural powers when all Batman's doing is fighting the way he fights and using his gadgets. But it's interesting. It's a really cool episode. I like it. But yeah, in that one, we, the audience, see what really happened. It's just the narration sometimes conflicts with it because either they got it wrong or they're actually lying. Like, Bullock definitely lies a couple times. Like, he even says he saved Batman when, of course, it's the other way around. Batman drags him out before the warehouse collapses on him. It's a cool episode.
Yeah, I mean the technique doesn't sound that impressive nowadays, but it's got to start somewhere.
Right, it was fairly groundbreaking at the time.
Yeah.
Just the whole concept, as I said, like, different from the Batman, which is like actually showing, not just having characters say stuff, but showing what they say, and then showing something again, just like in a different way that was sort of a unique thing. We're seeing the same scene, but we're seeing it different 4 times over because people are giving different versions of it, which is pretty cool. And of course, the whole thing at the end is we never really do get to find out what exactly happened. I guess the best guess you can make is close probably to what the woodcutter said, because he has the least reason to lie, and then you can just sort of mix and match. It's probably a blend of some of the things they say. Nobody really comes off well in it, which is one of the reasons why people feel the need to lie, I guess. Which is funny, really, when you think about it, because we're talking about a pretty serious crime. And yet the samurai, who is dead, but we'll say the samurai is a credible witness through the medium, I guess. That's the weird part about the movie. Because I guess there's another way you could watch the movie. You could watch the movie and just think, well, there's no supernatural stuff going on, and this this medium is just taking them all for a ride. You just say this medium's just making shit up to amuse himself.
Yeah, they kind of just brush off the fact that it's a medium. They don't really go into too much detail.
Yeah. I know people believed in that stuff back then, but I still don't know if that would have been like an official thing they would do for an investigation. Because wouldn't you do it all the time then? I mean, that would really help you solve murders, wouldn't it? If you could talk to the ghost of the guy that was murdered, shouldn't you get the truth every time? He knows what happened. And yet here, it's like, is the ghost lying? Are they lying?
Why have any witnesses at all? Just get the ghost in there to tell you what happened.
Yeah, because they say, they're just like, well, what reason would a ghost have to lie? But I don't know. If you go back to the honor thing quite a bit, if he really is the ghost, the samurai doesn't want to make it sound like he died like a bitch, or that he turned on his wife, because even though he's dead, he still doesn't want people to think bad stuff about him, I guess, considering honor is so important to a samurai. So there's sort of that added layer. But yeah, that is the one sort of odd thing that'll throw you off about the movie. Because it's like, okay, it's about a rape and a murder, and then you've got the eyewitness accounts. It's like, wait a minute, how are we getting the account from the guy that died? Through a medium.
Don't worry about it. Yeah, we got it.
Oh, of course, through a medium. Right, I get it. Ghost spoke to the people, yeah.
But yeah, as I was talking to Cole before we went live, this is kind of not in a bad way, but just a simple movie, straightforward, so.
Right, I mean, there's different angles to come at it from, but I mean, at its heart, it's really, I guess, about morality and perception. Why people would have reason to lie about something so serious, or why they might tell the sort of lies they say. Because the bandit doesn't even try to deny the crimes exactly. He just tries to tell them in a way that makes himself sound like cool in his mind, I guess. Like, yeah, I raped her. And yeah, I killed him. But, I raped her and I was awesome. And I almost convinced her to come away with me. And I killed him, but I killed him in, one-on-one, fair, honorable combat. Right. We had a really badass fight scene. So,
I was telling him how good his swordmanship is. Complimenting him.
And at least as far as those two go, like we said, like the woodcutter, well, what reason does he have to lie? We don't really know. With the woman, what reason does he have to lie? Nobody's disputing that she was raped, and yet she's living in such a misogynistic society. She still feels like she has to go out of her way to paint herself as a victim, which is true. Because there was a lot of victim blaming going on back then. It's like, oh, you liked it, or you wanted it, or, that kind of thing. And, I mean, it's not completely crazy to talk about like a real life instance where a samurai's wife is raped and her husband is just disgusted with her. That definitely happened. And in the case of like the bandit, you're thinking, well, he's a bandit, he's a criminal, he does these things, so obviously it follows he's probably a liar. And then on the flip side, you can think he thinks they got me anyway. Maybe I will just tell the truth. They caught me. I can't get away. What's interesting too is like one little bit we didn't mention is there's there's one other story in that. There's one other story in the movie because we have the three accounts that they all give about it, and then we have the extra fourth account that the woodcutter gives when he reveals that he was a witness to it. And then before that, of course, we have the woodcutter telling the commoner about the accounts, so it's secondhand. But there's one other thing: is when the bandit is brought in, he's brought in by the guy that caught him. So the guy that caught him has his story about how he caught him. He says, "I went down. I was on the beach, and there was the bandit flat on the beach. He'd fallen off the horse, and all these arrows were all over the place. I knew those arrows belonged to a samurai. He probably stole the horse from a samurai. So I went and I got him." The samurai and the bandit disputes this. He says, "I wouldn't fall off my horse." He says, "There's no way I'd fall off my horse." He says, "It was a hot day, so I took a drink at a stream. But I don't know, there must have been a poisonous snake upstream because I started getting a stomach ache and I got sick, So it sort of establishes right off that he has like sort of this need to make himself look better. He's like, "I'm not some idiot that would fall off his horse." So it is a kind of an important detail because it sort of sets the stage for how he's going to tell the actual story, because he wants to spin it in such a way that even though, yes, I'm admitting to these crimes, I did it in a cool way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a resourceful, clever guy. That's why the first time I saw it, I was a little surprised. Like, I thought for sure once we got into other versions, the samurai's spirit or the wife were going to dispute the whole trap. And they were going to say, "No, I didn't fall for that. Something else happened." But no, they all seem to agree that the dumb samurai was like, "Yes, crazy stranger with a sword, I'll follow you off into the woods and leave my wife alone and allow you to get the drop on me and tie me to a tree like an idiot." Like, I really thought that would be something that would be disputed, and it wasn't.
No.
So that was kind of a bit of a surprise. But yeah, I just love it for its efficiency, much like something like Rear Window. It's more complicated than Rear Window because of the conflicting stories, but it still takes about the same amount of time, maybe even less. It's only about 90 minutes long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right at about 90 minutes.
I liked The Last Duel, though. It wasn't anything amazing, but it was definitely, it's a Ridley Scott film. It's well made. It looks good. It's interesting seeing like Adam Driver opposite somebody like Matt Damon, because I'm so used to Matt Damon, and Adam Driver feels more recent. But I guess Matt Damon's probably not that much older than him.
I wouldn't think so. I think Adam Driver's been around for a while.
Yeah,
he just didn't really hit it big until he was
still Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know who he was before he was Kylo Ren.
I didn't either.
I can't think. I mean, I guess he'd been in stuff.
I thought he was one of the Ramones.
That's what he looks like. That's who we should definitely play. Didn't they say fucking that idiot Pete, what's his name, was going to play a Ramon or something?
Davidson?
Yeah.
Did you? No, I don't think I heard
I thought I heard that Pete Davidson was going to play Joey Ramone. I was like, he's tall and gangly. That's like the only thing that's similar.
I don't see the appeal of that guy, honestly.
Oh no, I think he fucking sucks.
I don't think he's funny. He looks like a goblin.
Yeah, no, I don't get it either. And I know people say, "You're jealous." Well, sure, but I'm jealous of anybody really in that position. So I'm picking on him because I think he genuinely sucks. There's plenty of actors out there that are living great lives, making lots of money, and sleeping with pop stars and stuff like that. So I mean, I'm not picking on him just for that. Is he dating a Kardashian now?
I think so. Yeah.
See, I'm not jealous of that. I don't want to date a Kardashian. But yeah, I think he sucks. I even watched his movie. I watched King of Staten Island.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those movies that feels like it has 0 point. Like, it's just a bunch of stuff that happens. Like, it doesn't feel like a story arc. And it has other people that annoy me in it, too. It has Bill Burr or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
I think he's super annoying. and he's annoying in this movie. And I don't know. It was such a waste of my time. I don't know why I watched it. It just, was it a, did what's his name directed? Who I don't like anyway.
Apatow, right?
Yeah, yeah. Because it was such an Apatow movie. Like everything about
Really?
it dripped his stuff, and I don't like his stuff at all. So I mean, really, what was I doing watching the movie? I don't know. I guess I was
He's
just
hit and miss
curious.
for me. I do like some of his stuff, but yeah.
I mean, it's just a bunch of stuff that happens. He's just this guy that doesn't have much going on or anything, and his mom starts dating this fireman who is yeah, it's weird. It's like his dad was a fireman who got killed, and now like she's dating another fireman. He doesn't like that because it's like, firemen are not reliable fathers because they get killed or something. And I don't know. He's of course a stoner, and he wants to be like a tattoo artist, and he just sort of goes around, talks to people, and it's boring. And I don't really know where there's any story in there, but I don't know. I guess if you like Pete Davidson, you'd like it because it's basically him sort of playing himself. He's like, I don't know. I have some mental issues. It's like, and that's the other thing. Like, why does everybody act like he's the first person to ever have any sort of like mental issues or talk about like mental health? Like, he is not some mental health hero because he's actually just said, oh, yeah, I've had problems. It's like you and like 75% of the world,
Mm-hmm.
you're some big hero because you'll talk about it on Weekend Update or whatever.
Yeah, I think didn't his dad die in 9/11?
Oh, man. Well, I mean, I feel bad if that's true, of course. I feel bad for
I
anybody
think
that
it
goes
was
through
his
something
dad.
like
Either his
that.
mom or his dad. His dad may have been a firefighter, actually.
Oh, yeah. So I guess maybe the movie's really, and I guess he probably is from Staten Island, isn't he? I assume.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I don't know anything about Staten Island. It's always just sort of a joke that it's like lame, stupid people. That's always sort of the joke. It's kind of like Boston, I guess, but with different accents.
Yeah.
Like, and anytime I hear or see anything about Staten Island, it's like everybody over there is dumb. They're not educated, and all they really care about is like fucking and like getting high. It's like, okay, go Staten Island. That's definitely what's going on in that movie, which I can't even really remember. Like I said, it doesn't really have an overall plot structure, really. Like, I mean, you could say at first he doesn't like that his mom's dating this guy. By the end, he's kind of okay with it. He's dating this girl, kind of, and they're not sure what the relationship is. By the time it's over, they still don't really know. He has like aspirations to be a tattoo artist, but he's not doing it when the movie's over. Like, I'm not saying I need a movie where everything needs to be wrapped up and accomplished, but something has to have happened, and like really just like nothing happens in that movie. I don't know. Some stuff happens, but yeah. Joey but yeah, I'm pretty sure I heard he was gonna play Joey Ramone or something like that. Like, Adam Driver can't do it. He's too healthy. Because Adam Driver's not just tall; he's like a big, bulky guy. Because I don't know if he always was, but he had to be. He had to be for Kylo Ren, and he's just sort of kept that. He's got like a really broad chest and shoulders.
Yeah,
which works well for the movie that he's in. That I was talking about, The Last Duel, because he had to play like a squire guy who fights with a big, heavy sword.
He's definitely fighting an uphill battle because he doesn't have those leading man good looks. But I think he is a good actor, though. I haven't seen all of his stuff, but
yeah, you'd probably like The Last Duel. It's not amazing, but it's a well-made movie with a decent story.
You said Ridley
Ben
Scott?
Affleck is probably it's Ridley Scott. Ben Affleck's probably the weirdest thing about it. So like Ben Affleck plays like an earl or something. So it's like the whole thing is Matt Damon at the start where things start. Matt Damon and Driver are both like squires, which is not really like people think of like squires. Oh, they're like kids that help knights, but like the actual position of squires. They're not knights, but they're something. And they fought in some battles together. And they're basically sort of friends. Then Matt Damon marries this woman who's like pretty and everything, but a lot of people wouldn't want to marry her because her dad was considered a traitor for something that happened years ago. So it's not necessarily a great match exactly. And they both sort of report to this, I think he's an earl, played by Ben Affleck, and he's a real jerk. Like, he's like, He's just like, I do whatever I want and I push people around. You know, he's like an arrogant prick, right? Who abuses his power. Like, I'm sure there are many others. But he starts to really like Adam Driver. And like he kind of like takes him on almost as like kind of like his like right hand man. Meanwhile, Matt Damon has all sorts of reasons to hate Ben Affleck's character, and they have a few public confrontations where like they yell at each other, and that puts a strain on the kind of friendship that he had with Adam Driver. And then like eventually Adam Driver meets the wife, and again there is a really good scene. Speaking of seeing the same scene a couple times and seeing it differently, it's interesting. So they meet at like some fair or something. It's the first time he's met the wife. They've already had some sort of like public problems, and it's interesting how it's told. This is some spoilery, but anyway, I don't mind. So like in Matt Damon's version of the story, he calls him over and he says something like, you know, servants of the king or whatever, you know, we shouldn't be enemies. And the other guy goes, well put, and they shake hands. In the other version of the story, it's reversed. You know, the guy who's telling it says, I'm the one who said those things, and the guy said, well put. And then in both versions, Matt Damon says, here's my wife, and he says, wife, give him a kiss. And this is where things are really different, because in Matt Damon's version, they kiss and they break apart. But in Adam Driver's, they kiss and she like seems to be really moved by the kiss, and she hesitates and she looks at him, you know, like that. And so the whole thing from Adam Driver's perspective is like, oh, she felt something, like she wants me. And his whole thing, like leading up to the rape, he has to trick her into letting him into her house while her husband's away. Anyway, it's like his whole thing is he's talking in both versions. He's talking about how much he's in love with her and how everything's awesome, and like it's all because it's real love. The rape is really short and almost nothing, and it's almost like, you know, it's exactly what you expect. Like once it's over, it's like all his passion is like gone. He's like, oh yeah, you should probably you know, shouldn't tell anybody about this, and yeah, that would be good. He just like leaves. It's funny, but it's also terrible. But yeah. You know, he's all on this thing, because the other thing is like part of his character is like they show that he can get women when he wants, and that he's kind of has a reputation for it. But it's like, no, she's different. I'm in love with her. But once he like fucks her for a little while, like he doesn't even they don't even have their clothes off, and like it's like he's had it, he's done, you know, he'll go. And he's like, yeah. It's probably for the best if you don't tell anybody, and bye bye. Again, you have to laugh, even though it's terrible. Yeah, which is actually. Big spoilers here, I guess. Not really. It's not like a twist or anything, but it's like it's the one thing that does actually wind up giving her some enjoyment in her life. I won't tell you how the duel goes. I won't say what happens to the husband or Adam Driver, but in part of the epilogue, she does get to live with. I think she has a daughter or something, and she's very happy about that. So she gets some happiness having the daughter. So that's part of the epilogue. What's interesting is the king at that time would have been Charles VI. And they were right. They did their homework, because at the time, Charles VI would have been really young. He would have been like in his early to mid-20s. And they do show one little thing that hints at who he was. I don't expect everybody to have memorized all these monarchs of France and everything like that. But there's a part where Charles himself, it's been taken to him now, and he's saying how things are going to go. I'm trying to remember. He's talking about how the duel works and what the rules are or something like that. I wish I could remember. But he says something like basically what the consequences would be. Because, you know, it's a trial by combat type thing. You know, whoever is telling the truth, God's on their side, so they'll win, right? Because what the stakes come down to is, you know, not only is if Matt Damon loses the duel, will he get killed in the duel, but she'll be burned alive for making a false rape accusation, right? So that's on the line now. So again, it's sort of like in this movie, it's pointing out like it's bad enough that women are being raped all the time in this awful society, but this is the way society treats it. It's like, well, you know, if your accusation can't be proven, you'll die, and we'll, in the worst way, we'll burn you alive. And I think it's after that. So he announces that he's telling the rules, and he said, and of course, if this happens to me, and then he has like a sort of like weird like smile, like he thinks it's cool, and that's all we really get from Charles. But if you know Charles, you know that his reign was marked by weird periods of crazy mental instability, where he was really erratic and nuts. At one point, he thought he was made of glass, literally, and he used to try to make them change stuff around the castle and give himself special clothes because he was worried he would break. So there was other weird stuff he did too, but that's probably my favorite thing about Charles VI, is that he literally for a while believed he was made of glass. So
Probably
this is what you get with
syphilis or
all that.
something, right?
Well, all that inbreeding they do in those
Yeah.
European families. There's all sorts of mental instability in those various monarchs, but yeah. What's funny though is like his really came and went. Like he could like rule decently for like a few years and it seemed like kind of normal, and then for the next few years he'd be like batshit insane. It's pretty interesting. Charles VI. I'd already heard a little bit about that, but then after I watched the movie, I looked him up and found out some stuff. Yeah, his mental illness. At one point, he was even called Charles the Mad.
I think that was pretty common around those times. I know with King George, he was mad as well.
Yeah,
that's British though.
At one point, he was going to do some sort of battle, and he was leading the army. Charles set off with an army, July 1392. So this would be a few years after the events of the movie, which ends in 1386. The progress of the army was slow, driving Charles into a frenzy of impatience. As the king and his escort were traveling through the forest near Le Mans on hot August morning, a barefoot leper dressed in rags rushed up to the king's horse and grabbed his bridle. "Ride no further, noble king," he yelled. "Turn back, you are betrayed." The king's escorts beat the man back, but did not arrest him, and he followed the procession for half an hour, repeating his cries. The company emerged from the forest at noon. Wait a second, where's this going? Blah, blah, blah. Charles shuddered, drew his sword. "Forward against the traitors. They wish to deliver me to the enemy." Oh, wait, this was going somewhere. Oh, yeah, so he basically he was freaking out and said, "Oh, we got to kill these guys," and they charge into a fight. Or no. That's what it was. He started thinking he was surrounded by traitors, so he was on his horse, and he started, like, attacking the people around him, swinging his sword. And then when his soldiers tried to, like, get him off the horse, he fell onto the ground and lay down and went into a coma.
Wow.
And he was in a coma for like a few months. But yeah, periods of mental illness continued throughout the life. So maybe that's where it happened. At one point in 1393, he could not remember his name and did not know he was king. He asked his wife came to visit him. He asked the servants who she was and ordered them to make her go away. But yeah, there's a few different things here. But definitely the glass thing was bad. Which is a real thing. It's an actual condition other people have had. It's called the Glass Delusion. But yeah. So the movie's not about him. He's only in it for a couple scenes, but I do like that. Like they show he's got some weirdness to it because like he's laying out the rules and saying everything, and then when he says, and of course, if he dies, that means it's false, and for that you'll be burned alive. And then he gives like this weird like smirk, like isn't that hilarious? I'm like, that does seem probably like something Charles VI might have done or said. But speaking also of Ridley Scott, a movie I want to do on here, and it's on Disney Plus, but I really want to do the director's cut, so that makes it a problem, is Kingdom of Heaven. Because Kingdom of Heaven is one of those movies that I think is vastly improved by the director's cut. Like, I think it makes a really big difference in the quality. It makes it a lot longer, too, I have to say. It's already a long movie. The director's cut makes it longer, but I think it's a lot better. So I think that would be a cool movie to do, but I don't know where I'd have to, like, buy it to get the director's cut. Because, yeah, on Disney Plus, you can watch it, but...
I haven't seen the director's cut. I've seen it. It's been a while.
Yeah. Director's cut just adds a lot of stuff that helps you understand things a little better. It sucks because in a lot of ways, it's one of the very few movies out there that accurately depicts a lot of medieval stuff and doesn't just like make junk up or do the bare minimum. And then I feel like the movie ruins itself at the ending because they take something, again, very complicated and nuanced and just sort of twist it into like a modern kind of morality thing. Like they make it sound like Orlando Bloom was this guy who was super modern and he was just like, Christians and Muslims, we should like forget our differences and all get along, which is not really what it was about or what he meant or what he did. And then and then in the epilogue they say, he brought peace to blah 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 blah, and then it says something like to this, and then it says something about like how peace was elusive in that Middle East, and it's like something that continues to this day or something. Like I hate shit like that. It's so lazy. It's the same thing as people that say history repeats itself. I hate it when people say that. History doesn't repeat itself. History is not that fucking simple. That's like saying World War II was a repeat of World War I. Like, no. I know that they were similar and their things, but I mean, it's not a repeat. So, I mean, I don't mind if people say history repeats itself if they're talking about like something that maybe happened in their own life or some little thing. But if you're talking about like big actual historic events like wars or revolutions or I don't know, stuff with slavery, like no, history doesn't repeat itself. Things are sometimes similar, but yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know. That just drives me nuts. But anyway, I mostly think it's a good movie, but it has little touches like that that bother me. I'm like that epilogue just makes me sick. But there's some good stuff
He,
in there. Like there's a part. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say Ridley Scott did a Raised by Wolves. Have you heard of that? It's an HBO
I've heard of
show.
it, but I
It's
haven't
actually
seen
pretty
it.
good. It's almost like in the same universe as like Alien, and
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
I
knew
guess
it was
Blade
something
Runner.
sci-fi.
Yeah.
It was something sci-fi-ish.
Mhm.
There's gonna be a Blade Runner show, which I don't like the idea of. There's already an animated Blade Runner show. Was it Black Lotus or something? Something
Oh,
like
I've heard
that.
of that. Yeah.
I briefly had like Adult Swim, but I didn't get to watch it. I didn't make the time. Now I don't have it anymore. Had a cool
Mhm.
animation style. I don't mind something set in the Blade Runner universe as long as they keep it small, but I don't know. It's one of those things where I wish let's not milk it, you know? I hate it when stuff gets bloated and I don't know.
Right.
Sometimes I didn't even want them to make Blade Runner 2049. I'm still blown away by how good it actually turned out to be. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it should be a green light to just make a bunch of Blade Runner spin-off shit. Like, let's not do that. But yeah, I'd heard
The,
Raised by Wolves was something sci-fi. That's all I knew.
mhm. Yeah. I haven't really liked anything Ridley Scott's done in a while, so I'm gonna have to check out that the one you were talking about.
Yeah, there's nothing amazing about it or anything like that. Like I can't say, oh, you're gonna love it. Like no, but it is a pretty good movie, and it's more sort of a return to form for him in a way.
Mhm.
I mean, I like that it's a period piece set in that, but it's not like a big epic. It's not like Kingdom of Heaven. It's a very small sort of story. It's about a real thing. It's an intimate story. So you do have a couple scenes of some real battles that happen, but they're really brief because it's not about that.
Mhm.
About some of the campaigns going on. I think in Normandy at the time, it's hard to keep up so much. That was still part of the Hundred Years' War, I think, which being 100 years was long and complicated. But the movie itself is just about between these three people, really. It's just with Ben Affleck as sort of a side character in it, but it's really about the husband, the wife, and Adam Driver. But I was going to say one of the things that is really good about Kingdom of Heaven early in the movie that's actually accurate because one of the things they love to show in any movie that shows medieval knights is the big swords and fighting, but they never really seem to really show it right. But they show it right. There's a scene early in the movie where after Liam Neeson has told Orlando Bloom that he is his son, there's a part where they're like on the road and now they're camping, and he's
Mhm.
telling him how to fight properly with a great sword. And what he's saying is actually historically right. Is that you keep it up like this. And one of the main reasons you do that is because of it's so fucking heavy. You need to swing it down. If you're carrying
Mhm.
it low, you can't parry like huh, huh, like that, like as if it's a small light sword. So really,
Mhm.
when they're fighting, they keep it up high and turn like this, and after they swing, they step back and bring it up again. So there's a whole scene where it shows him learning that, which is true. When you have swords that big and heavy, you can't just spin them around like they're a rapier or something, which they seem to show all the time in movies. They make it seem like
Mhm.
those swords didn't weigh anything, and plus a lot of the time they're wearing heavy armor too.
Oh
So
yeah,
that was
those
that was a
broadswords
scene I
are
really
heavy.
appreciated. That
Mhm.
was that was like the same year as Batman Begins, and they were like, you know what, Liam Neeson's like a really good mentor character. He was good as Qui-Gon Jinn. Now he can be Orlando Bloom's mentor, and here he's Batman's mentor. He's really good for this sort of thing. And Edward Norton's in that movie, but you would have no idea it was him. He gives such a quote. He gives one because he gives a good performance, but also he wears a mask throughout it too because he plays a guy that was a leper
Oh.
who was again a real historical figure. He was a king or prince or something. He was holding Jerusalem at the time, so it's about when various Europeans were holding Jerusalem, and he was a leper, and he was very interesting character. I can't remember his name, But anyway, we can circle back and finish before I blab on about too many things. But yeah, I would love to do Kingdom of Heaven, but I just feel like it would be more worth doing if we could compare it to the director's cut, because I think the director's cut adds a lot of cool stuff. But I don't know. Maybe we'll be able to work something out down the line. I don't know. I'm gonna watch the normal version again sometime soon, since it's on Disney Plus, to refamiliarize myself. Plus, since I'm sort of thinking of Ridley Scott. But anyway, wrap up on Rashomon. So repeat some of the stuff we said before. Just sort of a landmark movie. It's really what cemented both Kurosawa and Mifune as stars, not just in Japan but internationally. And then, of course, they would go on to have a great creative relationship together, doing many movies together. This was like the first period piece movie with samurai that he would do, and of course, he got to sort of get known for it. As we said, it was sort of groundbreaking at the time for its storytelling conventions with the conflicting stories at the same event. It's easy to take that kind of stuff for granted now, but as Jay said, these things do have to start somewhere. So it was kind of a cool motif and a big deal at the time. Yeah, just a really efficient movie. It's not long. It's maybe 90 minutes, just a little over 90 minutes, and it gets in everything it really has to get in. And I don't know. I mean, sort of heavy themes about morality, and as we said, you can really juxtapose it with other things, talking about like women in society and the way women are treated, and the way we view rape victims. That certainly works. It works its way into the movie too. But I don't know. I lost what I was going to say. But it is a really great movie, and I hadn't seen it in a few years, but it still hits. It still hits pretty hard. It's usually in the conversation as among the best movies ever made.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. A lot of people say it is the best movie.
Wow, the very best. Like, I wouldn't go that far. It's not even my favorite Kurosawa, but it definitely is a really great movie. But I was going to say, oh wait, before we go, I'll just have a quick look here. Yeah, so Sight and Sound, which we talk about a lot. Sight and Sound does a top 10 list of the best films ever made, like about every 14 years or so, something like that. It was on the list at 10th in 1992, but I think that's the only time it appeared on that one.
Oh, wow.
But as you said, we point out a lot of the films we've covered on this show are on the 1001 Movies That You Must See Before You Die book from 2003 that's been updated several times to include newer movies. Yeah, just a few different lists on here. Empire Magazine, BBC's list of 100 greatest foreign language films. That was in 2018. And of course, there were some Japanese lists too. But the Sight and Sound one is really the one. I know we're going to finish up here. I'm going to take a really quick look here. So Sight and Sound has done the top 10 list. Yeah, let's see. In 50, oh, maybe it's just every 10 years. Let's see. They did it in 52, 62, 72, 82, 92, 2002, 2012. So does that mean we're due for an update? Because it's 2022 now, right? So maybe we're going to get a new one. So I'll just very quickly say the most recent one from 2012 goes like this. Vertigo at number 1, which is my favorite Hitchcock film. Citizen Kane at number 2, which we've covered on here. Tokyo Story at number 3, which is considered Ozu's greatest film. The Rules of the Game, the French film, at number 4. Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, which I don't know, which is a very old silent film. Oh, it's by F.W. Murnau. So that's that German guy that did a lot of stuff like Metropolis and things like that. 2001: A Space Odyssey at number 6. The Searchers, that's the Western with John Wayne, at number 7. Man with a Movie Camera at number 8, which is an experimental Soviet film from the 20s. The Passion of Joan d'Arc, which is another very famous silent film. It's probably my second favorite silent film I've ever seen after Metropolis. Really, really wonderful film. We're talking about silent films. And at number 10, 8.5, which is by a guy that we've covered on here, the Italian Federico Fellini. So that's the newest version. So I think the only one that had Rashomon was the 1992 one, where it actually tied at number 10 with Passion of Joan d'Arc. So that's interesting. But yeah, The Sight and Sound one. It's the one. I think Tokyo Story's even been #1 at one point. Maybe not.
My list would be different.
Yeah. So would mine. And again, I have to separate my favorite films and what also I consider best. Because like my favorite film, I don't think is the best film ever made. You know, my favorite film is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I'm pretty sure it's not the best movie ever made, but it's my favorite.
See, a lot of people aren't able to make that distinction. I can appreciate something even though it's not my favorite or anything. You know, I can appreciate it for what it is.
Sure. But I like the Sight and Sound lists a lot because they're very international. You know, they really they don't have like an American bias or a British bias or whatever. They seem to really take into account films from all. Oh yeah, because so as I said, in the most recent one, 2012, they've got Tokyo Story at #1, which is pretty cool, by Ozu, who we've been on in here. We did Late Spring by Ozu, and we'll definitely do another Ozu going forward. But anyway, yeah, so lots of interesting stuff going ahead. Said there's other Japanese directors we want to do. There's other stuff sort of set in the medieval period that I want to do. Maybe even something like Kingdom of Heaven. Maybe we can work out some way to see the director's cut, because I haven't seen the director's cut in years either. I just had a friend that had bought it years ago when it was pretty new, like 2006, something like that, and I watched it and I was like, wow, that is a lot better, and I haven't seen it since. But anyway, we can wrap up for now. So thanks a lot for joining us for Rashomon, and hopefully we'll be back very soon. Hopefully next week with a new one, can have some more consistency. We didn't have much consistency in 2021. I'm going to try to correct that in 2022. On this day of twos, it's February 22nd, 2022. So that's like, I already made a joke about it on Twitter. It's like Two-Face's favorite day. He's definitely robbing Gotham's Second National Bank and leaving a bunch of clues for Batman on this one. Because it's 2-2, it's 2-2-2, 2022, or 2-2-2-2-2. Yeah. Never be repeated. It's a unique time in history to be alive. Aren't we lucky to have a random day in February? Be a bunch of twos on the calendar. I don't know. But anyway, yeah. So hopefully we'll be able to get some momentum and get some consistency going and be back again next week. So thanks a lot for anybody that joined us this week, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Bye-bye.